now I'm going to take you through a potential route through answering this essay. And this is going to be something that, it's just my opinion. It's one way that I could go through this. And it's, at least to my eyes, about the right amount of content that I'd want to include in an essay of this type. So to begin with, I'd have my introduction, and then I'd start by giving some background on the burden of proof. So we considered this in one of the early lectures. So I'm going to set out that I think that the burden of proof lies with those who are seeking to defend the afterlife. They're going to be making the extraordinary claim, and that requires an extraordinary argument. So, because of this background assumption of naturalism, the scientific explanation for how the world generally works, I'm going to argue that the burden of proof lies on those who are seeking to defend the afterlife, because they're the ones who are saying something that goes against the ordinary way that we understand the world. And they're trying to prove the existence of something rather than claim that something doesn't exist. So I'm also going to argue in this point that, even though loads of people believe that um, there's an afterlife and loads of people have believed it throughout history, I'm going to argue that this doesn't alter the burden because it's not about how many people believe the thing, it's about whether it fits with our best understanding of the world. So I'm going to say that, even if loads of people believed that there was an afterlife, because naturalism is our best way of understanding the world, our best theory of how the world currently works, and the afterlife seems to conflict with that, I'm going to suggest that the burden of proof is going to be on the afterlife defender rather than the afterlife skeptic to prove their claim that there is life after death. So that's my first section. It's going to be about this burden of proof stuff. Then my second section is going to be concerned with debunking evidence for the afterlife. So I'm going to talk about the strongest argument for the existence of life after death is the idea, at least in this kind of religious sense of the personal afterlife, is these arguments that come from proposed near-death experiences. So the idea that near-death experiences happen and they can only be explained if there is a genuine afterlife that people are experiencing. So I'm going to say that, accept that from this argument that, there is a lot of evidence that seems quite difficult to explain. So it seems like we get all these cases where people claim to know things that they shouldn't be able to know from having had near-death experiences. People see things that they could never have seen. And so all these cases seem pretty hard to kind of explain away. But I'm going to argue that, a lot of this evidence about, why people have these experiences can be given other explanations. And I'm going to suggest that there's some bias probably in this kind of psychological profile of people who report. So looking at the propensities of people who report near-death experiences and their belief in the afterlife compared to their likelihood of reporting other things, their likelihood of dissociation, all this kind of stuff. So some of the arguments I'm going to include here are from that third lecture we looked at. So I'm going to talk specifically about kind of biological explanations for near-death experiences and how these are going to be far more likely than the explanations that people have had a genuine contact with the afterlife. And then finally, I'm going to finish by giving a kind of adapted version of Hume's argument against miracles. So this idea that as a general rule, as a general principle, if somebody tells me that they have experienced the afterlife on the basis of a near-death experience, I'm going to argue that it's always rational for me to think that their near-death experience has another explanation that's a superior explanation than it was genuinely caused by their being in contact with something genuinely supernatural, like this kind of religious afterlife. And then finally, in section 3, I'm going to pivot to talking about another way that the afterlife might work. So I'm going to have already rejected this traditional religious idea of a personal afterlife, but I'm going to defend the possibility of a digital afterlife. So I'm going to argue that, this being open-handed about it, this is going to rely on assumptions about the functional character of the brain, but I think these can be defended. So I'm going to try and offer, brief defenses of why I think the mind probably is functional, or at least can be understood that way. And then I'm going to reject this final concern about personal identity by defending a psychological account of personal identity. So saying that what really matters in cases of personal identity is going to be a continuity of, psychological change. So as long as this kind of digital thing that survives me as my psychology or has a kind of relevantly similar psychology, then that's enough for us to suggest that that is me. I've survived in a digital sense. So even after the death of my physical body, it seems like I could survive digitally. And so there is one answer to the question, is there life after death, in the affirmative? Because it could be possible that I could live on digitally. And I'm going to conclude by saying that, obviously, there's a lot of potential holes here. So you might want to say that if people are going to try and reject my argument, they could try and reject the stuff about the personal identity. They could reject the stuff about the functional character of the mind. But as it stands, this seems like the strongest argument that we can give if we are trying to say that there is such a thing as an afterlife. Um, and this is going to raise some potential ethical concerns as well. So based on how we should treat digital beings, how we should treat eternal beings, all this kind of stuff is going to be something that I'm going to kind of make reference to, but without talking about in great detail, because I'm going to want to conclude and kind of wrap up my argument and so, give an overview of what I already said. So this is my potential route to this essay. So focusing on these three sections here that are kind of neatly individuated. And this seems to me about the right level of content. So I'm going to focus on breadth, also depth, and try and balance these two together. Because if I feel like if I had any more content in this essay, I would be struggling in 2,000 words to explain it all and impact it all in ways that felt satisfying and felt like I was giving enough importance to all the points.